So today's topic, related to my birth family journey of finding them after all these years, relates to World War II, which on the surface you wouldn't think it would play into my existence. I was born in 1960, 15 years after the war ended, but the predecessor generation had to go through this, and this is what they call the greatest generation, and for good reason, for what they accomplished. And I thought I would just touch base on my adoptive father's experience in World War II. He was 43 when I was adopted in 1960, so he had served during most of the war years. And then on my birth mother's side, I found out my grandfather, my birth mother's father, served in World War II as well. And radically different situations and outcomes, and they affected both families and indirectly affected my opportunities in life and where I am today. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. The interesting thing, I'll start with my adoptive father because I knew this best. I knew his story. He shared later in life, he shared about his service in World War II. And I didn't really know that much about it when I was young, but he had graduated college just barely in 1941 and started working for Libion's Ford Glass Company in Toledo, Ohio as an architect. He was a trained architect. And so he's working there, and the war starts. You have Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. So he's already a junior executive at this firm, and Libion's Ford, the company, tells all their younger gentlemen, hey, the war is starting. We have to retool our business for the war effort. You guys should sign up for the reserves. And then when you get called up, you'll get called up into your area of expertise, which, made a whole lot of sense to tell him that, because otherwise you might just get called up into the Army or the Navy, Marines, whatever, just as a young man. So my father signed up in the reserves. He got called up, and he got called up into the Navy Construction Battalion, the Seabees, as they're known. And I'll show you a little picture. Their little logo is kind of classic. The little bumblebee with a machine gun. So they were out there on the front lines building, airfields, bases, all that kind of stuff. So my adoptive father got called up. He got sent to Virginia, and he was designated an officer because he had a college degree. So they sent him to Virginia with 50 men and equipment, and he had to build a base near Williamsburg, Virginia. And he built Camp Peary, Peary, which still is in existence today, but it's a FBI training facility. And as a kid, we actually were in Williamsburg. We drove by there. My dad tried to talk the gate guard into, hey, can I get in and see the base that I built back? And they said, absolutely not. So that never happened. But yeah, my dad was called up in Seabees, worked in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and then in the Philippines. Here's a cute little picture of him in his, I guess that's kind of a quasi mugshot. But I also have a prized possession, which is his Pearl Harbor Officers Club card, which still is colorful and prized possession. So amazing to still have that, and even have a photo of him on a Jeep out there somewhere. So he was building things in the Pacific, and a lot of his other memorabilia that he had, including some color film that he shot, I donated to the CB Museum, which is in Port Hueneme, California. So they have that. So I knew about the Pacific Theater from growing up with my adoptive father. So while I'm doing my search for my birth family, and as we discussed before, I got it once Ancestry.com came alive, and I was able to find census records and see my birth mother and her parents. And then when I see her parents, I see that her father, through the records, through Ancestry, had died in World War II in 1944. So I'm like, oh, well, this is interesting. He, and then some other records is like, okay, he was in the 2nd Armored Division. He was a tank sergeant, and the 2nd Armored Division under General Patton was known as Hell on Wheels. So unbelievable. So he passed away in end of July 1944. So like 6 or 7 weeks after the D-Day invasion. So here I am with like, oh my gosh, my biological grandfather gave his life in France after D-Day. So stunning. So I hadn't met any of my birth family at this point at all to ask any more questions, but I decided I need to go find out more about the timeline of D-Day and what happened after, because I didn't know as much about that details as I did about the Pacific from my adoptive father. So I went to a bookstore and I found a used book that about D-Day from this gentleman, Anthony Beauvoir, who the book is kind of written, and I was looking for a chronological take where day by day it would explain what was happening, because that way I could get up to the date of death of my grandfather and maybe find out what happened or the circumstances around it. So it is a shot in the dark to like read a book and see if you can get clues from that type of thing. But that's exactly what happened to me on page 362 of this book, which I'm reading. And this is before I find my birth family or anything. He was part of I'll read this section so you get a sense of unbelievable discovery. He was part of Combat B of the 2nd Armored Division, and they finished preparing roadblocks and ambushes in the area of Grimensnil. The Germans in the Rancy Pocket were trying to escape past them. Near St. Denis-le-Gast, a mile from Grimensnil, the 82nd Reconnaissance Battalion set up a block covered by anti-tank guns and the 92nd Field Artillery Battalion. They saw a column of vehicles approaching, led by a couple of American armored cars. But these had been captured by the Germans and were being used as a ruse. As they passed, an anti-tank gunner spotted a German half-track immediately behind them and opened fire. The artillery also reacted quickly, firing over open sights, and the German column was destroyed. Soon afterwards, the command post of the 2nd Armored Reserve was nearly overrun in a surprise attack, but the defenders, mostly clerks and rear echelon personnel, held their nerve. With the help of a bright moon and the light from the burning vehicles, they picked their targets at short range as the German infantry charged. This was clearly demonstrated later that morning when officers went out to examine the corpses of the attackers. Another report cited the bravery of Sergeant Bishop, and this is where my hair stood up on the back of my neck, because that's my grandfather's name, Sergeant Bishop, whose body was found with 7 dead Germans around him, and Staff Sergeant Barnes, who cut the throats of 3 German attackers with a trench knife. Action during the fight was so mixed up that an aide man looked up to find a German aide man sharing his same trench. For a few minutes, both men frantically pointed at their Red Cross armbands and then frisked each other for possible weapons. So you can imagine the shock of reading this book and your grandfather's mentioned and the exact mechanism of his death. So pretty stunning. So he was, hand-to-hand combat outside of the tank after they got overrun. Pretty stunning. And then I thought I'd show this picture. This is a little memorial that's at my birth mother's home that has a picture of him. There's resemblance to me when I was younger, so I appreciate that. And you can see his Purple Heart there that he earned in that. And so that was the discovery of my birth grandfather's service in World War II. And then the follow-on effect of that, as you can imagine, my birth mother is only 4 years old when he passed away. So to have the military come and tell my grandmother that he's passed, and then what happened in their life after that. They're in rural Wisconsin. All of a sudden, there's no family support from the job he held before. And so the family struggles. They're in an apartment. My grandmother remarries. So my birth mother now has a stepfather that lasts a little while, and then that doesn't work out. And she finally remarries again and has a more stable situation with the stepfather, but certainly sets the family back and sets the path back for on my birth mother's side, versus my adoptive father, who survived the war, came back, reinstated his career at Libby owns Ford Glass Company, worked there many years, was able to grow to a place where, and stability, to where I get adopted and I get provided with opportunities that I probably wouldn't have had growing up in my birth family. So this is just wanted to cover the ground on some of these things in the past that really affect what goes on today. So that's what I wanted to share about my research and knowledge of World War II, how it relates to these two families. There's much more detail to it, but it seemed like this was a good summary for you to digest, and hope you'll see you next time as we keep going with the reunion with the birth family and more topics to come.